This morning we have with us Dr. Mustafa Fouda, currently Minister Advisor on Biodiversity. He was member of many intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and also member of the Animal Committee CITES. And he's the chairman IUCN National Committee and member of SCOPE National Committee at the Academy of Scientific Research and Technology, and is a member of the Center of Environmental Studies at Alexandria Bibliotheca. So he's with us today. He will give us this morning introduction on biodiversity, and then state of biodiversity in Egypt and the region. So I invite Dr. Mustafa Fouda to begin his intervention and his presentation. Dr. Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Rasha. Thank you very much, Jillian, for this very interesting workshop, and I hope it will be very useful to all of us. The whole idea about biodiversity, as Jillian said, very clear. This year, 2021, has enhanced the profile of biodiversity in a way that COP15 Part 1, we had 10 head of states that they talked about biodiversity, and Chinese government already allocated quite considerable amount of money for trust fund to spend on biodiversity, and they have encouraged many investors to join the biodiversity in good companies, whatever. So we are very happy that this year is quite interesting, and we hope it will continue like that. Now, when we talk about biodiversity here, first of all, we have to remember that in 1972, the whole world met together in Stockholm to discuss global problems at the time. And the main problem was pollution, like acid rains and all aspects of pollution. So it was a major global problem. But in 1990, IUCN published a very interesting study called the Biodiversity Strategy. And that was shared by Professor Muhammad Kassas, late Professor Kassas. At the time, he was the president of IUCN. Then in 1987, Swedish Prime Minister published a book, and that was the first time that they talk about sustainable development. So it is, from that point of view, all things were ready now for 1992, when the whole world met together in Rio and agreed on 3 major global environmental problems, that these are related to climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. Now, since we are talking about my presentation, we'll talk about the biodiversity in a very simple way. Biodiversity means variability among all living organisms, whether they are microorganisms or huge ones like the blue whales and things like that. It is not only we look at biodiversity as at level of species, but we can look at
وهناك بعض الفصائل التي ممكن أن ننظر لها وممكن أن ننظر إلى الموئل وحتى.
When it comes to ecosystem, let me just explain things in a very simple way. When we talk about habitat or we talk about environment, it is a space that humans live and interact with 3 major things. Number 1, the all living organisms like biodiversity, like animals, plants, whatever. Number 2, the media where they are living in, whether it is water, whether it's air, whatever, and the source of energy, whether it is solar energy, whatever. The interaction between all of this and specific things in a specific habitat, like lakes, like whatever, we call it ecosystem. So the whole idea about it is to provide benefits to people in a way that they can function and they can enjoy life to great extent. So this is an example of the different kind of animals and plants that exist in many places all over the world. particularly in Egypt to a great extent. It's not only the animals and plants, but the landscape to a great extent as well that form the main habitats and ecosystems. Having said that, we can look at the ecosystem at three levels: the ecosystem, species and genus, and genes, as I mentioned. Now, ecosystem to a great extent, they provide numerous services for human being that they are free of charge. I'll talk about it in a very simple way. It could be provisional, that they're providing food like fish, for example, or harvesting animals or plants, regulating, especially the different habitats and different places, or culture. That means that when we talk about culture, we can come to the Egyptian civilization, that they were able to make all use of water and agriculture that allowed them to stay, shall we say, wait until the harvest come, and then during this time people start thinking, and this is how the whole Egyptian civilization started supporting, especially functions and maintains all different kind of ecosystem. This is just an example of the provisional, that means that the food that can provide to human being, or regulating, especially the forests and things like that, regulating the climate. For example, people leave Cairo, for example, to Alexandria because the regulating system itself in Alexandria is typical Mediterranean, whereas in Cairo is quite different. Or cultural. So people talk, I'm talking about Egypt long time ago, more than 20,000, between 20,000 and 200,000 years ago, when we have what you call rock art. You have in the Western Desert of Egypt, very interesting phenomena where you have different people. People were very healthy. People were able to deal with animals like what you have seen already now. At the same time, the functioning to a great extent. When it comes to biodiversity, we, in a very simple way, the biodiversity convention deal with three major objectives: conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of biological component, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. In other words, we are talking about conservation, including protections, whatever. How can we ensure sustainability of these resources? At the same time, all people on Earth, they can benefit from all genetic resources available. The convention itself has two main protocols. One is dealing with biosafety, which is, shall we say, the technological advancement by taking gene from one species to another to improve agriculture, for example. And the other protocol, access and benefit sharing, that deal with what we call it now Nagoya Protocol. These are the objectives and whatever. The main articles that deal with the convention itself, all conventions, whether it's climate change or biodiversity, they deal with cooperation among different countries. They talk about conservation measure, sustainable use, monitoring and assessment of biodiversity, ex situ and in situ conservation, that means inside and outside the species habitat, research, capacity development, public awareness, environmental impact assessment, access to genetic resources, technology transfer, scientific and technical cooperation, biotechnology, ABS, invasive species, reporting. They have to, one of the main important articles is every country has to report about the progress about the convention to a great extent. The convention itself, how it works now, we work at two levels: thematic implementation, that means that very specific agricultural biodiversity, inland biodiversity, humid and subhumid, that dry environment, coastal and marine biodiversity, forestry biodiversity, mountain biodiversity, island biodiversity. This is thematic. That means that very specific programs that you have to implement whatever. But at the same time, you have what we call cross-cutting implementation. protected areas in agriculture, in coastal and marine and whatever, biodiversity assessment, strategic impact assessment, studying the ecosystem services and products, invasive species, ecotourism, many cross-cutting issues. In addition to the articles of the convention, we have many decisions. We meet every 2 years to discuss what we have done, but at the same time, we look at the emerging issues like nature-based solution that's already shared, or shall we say, mastered by IUCN, spatial planning, whatever we agree in principle in Alexandria, this doesn't mean that you go and apply it in Matruh, for example, whatever spatial planning has its own component. Technological advancement, whatever you may think about, whether geoengineering, that you can control the climate, or synthetic biology, that you deal with genes, whatever, etc. These are examples of decisions that are taken by every 2 years, hundreds of decisions that we're taking. We have already done now 15 meetings. That means that in every COP, we deal with at least 40 or 50 decisions. If you go a little bit in details about biosafety, for example, that we deal with protection, safe transfer, handling, and use of GMO. GMO is the genetically modified organisms that they may have adverse effect or impact on biodiversity conservation, human health, and transboundary movement. The main issues in this protocol is the risk assessment, handling, transport, packaging, identification, information sharing, and many other things as well. When it comes to access and benefit sharing, which is Nagoya Protocol, Nagoya is the city where we agreed in 2010 on this protocol. It has very clear objective that access, fair, and equitable sharing and benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources. Many issues include traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, compliance, monitoring utilization, اللي هو predetermined match, and many other issues as well. However, despite all of the efforts that have been done, we still deal with major 5 drivers of biodiversity loss. We are losing biodiversity at a large scale now. The first one is habitat fragmentation. If you have a Google, for example, map in Egypt, and look at this now and compare it with 10 years ago, you will be surprised with the incredible fragmentation of habitats, whether it's freshwater or marine or the desert or the mountain, whatever, pollution of all sources, whether it's air, in air or in water or in soil, overharvesting, like overfishing, whatever, invasive species. In a very simple way, invasive species is a species that go or move or arrive at a habitat if it's not its own habitats, and they can colonize the new habitat, and they can breed at least 3 generations, and they may have effect on the ecosystem or the environment or the health of human being, like the triggerfishes, whatever, etc. Climate change, we know all about it. If you add to all of these, demographic and urbanizations, human beings have already doubled over the last 40 years, and urbanization everywhere, along the coast, along the main cities, whatever. These are examples of all problems that we are facing, whether it is overfishing or indulging with plastics, whatever. These are examples of what's happening in the environment to a great extent, and even the amount of solid waste, or especially plastics, that we are talking about. Almost this was a few years ago, we are talking about at least 20 million tons of plastics already are thrown every year to the environment. It is true that we have been able to use technology in a way that we can transfer this solid waste, especially plastic, into something useful like socks, like shoes, like whatever, etc. One of the main issues that we deal with the convention is the protected areas. As you may know, the Egyptians, we have been pioneering in managing protected areas in Egypt. Protected area, in a very simple way, means an area that's characterized by specific habitats or species or ecosystem or cultural heritage as well that's exposed to any kind of danger, and that require including it in protected areas. How can we establish a protected area? Not only you go and say, oh, this is a nice place, and then you can go and declare it. No, it has its own purpose to a great extent. We declare protected areas because we need to protect the places that already in danger because of human being. Rehabilitation and restoration. If the place is already deteriorated, so we can implement rehabilitation and restoration programs. We allow scientists to do scientific research in a way that we can be able to understand the ecosystem functions and enjoy this cultural and natural heritage to great extent. To be able to declare a place, you have to deal with criteria. How this area is important from biogeographical point of view. That means that you have an area that don't or does not present in any other place. Environmental importance, naturalness. You don't go to area which is already polluted and you say, I am going to declare it as a protected area. It must have social or economic importance or international importance as well, or scientific importance. And then you must have access to go to it. You cannot go to the desert, for example, or to the mountain, and you don't have access to go to the place itself. Articles that deal with the protected areas or activities to a great extent, what our shabs or our rangers do in the protected areas, they deal with law enforcement, community development, scientific research, public awareness, visitor management, investment projects, especially dealing with ecotourism and things like that. So these are examples of the major activities that we implement within the protected areas: green economy, ex situ and in situ conservation, environmental impact assessment, mainstreaming biodiversity into development sector. These are the main activities that we implement in Egypt. But you don't do it just only by saying, I have a program. You must have a strategy, because this is one of the main articles in the convention itself, that every country, they have to prepare a strategy, and the strategy should be implemented. The main component of any strategy, as you know, you must have a vision. Where are you now and where are you heading in 5 years or 10 years from now? You must have mission in terms of what you plan to do, objectives, very clear objectives, like the one in the convention itself: conservation, sustainable use. You must have targets and indicator. Otherwise, it will be description. The whole world don't go now and deal with descriptive aspects now. You must have programs. You must have funding as well. At the same time, you have to develop capacity in a way that people can do and implement what they are assigned to do, and they have to report that too. This is the main component of any strategy worldwide. Even at your level, if you want to make a strategy for yourself, you must have a vision, mission, and whatever, etc. What you need to do when you develop the strategy, especially for biodiversity, the main important thing is the conservation of biodiversity. And biodiversity is the most important tool that you can deal or can protect biodiversity itself. How can you do that? You must integrate biodiversity conservation into all development sector. You don't work in isolation. It is not as a geographical isolation, but you have to reform your institutions in a way that you deal with all different sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's fisheries, whether it's tourism, and so on. The other important pillar of biodiversity is how to improve your knowledge at national level or regional level or whatever. So, number one, enhance communication, and certainly improve partnerships at all levels. So you deal with conservation, you deal with knowledge, you deal with the communications, whatever. That's why we are holding this important workshop that you are a major part in the implementation of biodiversity strategy. When we deal with sustainability of natural resources, anything that you deal with, whether it's a project, whether it's activity, or you must have major aspects of sustainability. Financial, without money, you cannot implement it. Institutionally, people should be professional. They do a job in a short time. That must be, we're talking about management. Social, without human, you are wasting your time, and certainly environment. These are the main sustainability. This is a science of sustainability to a great extent. I'm doing the best I can just to use bullets. Biodiversity and ecosystem. Nowadays, we talk about biodiversity as a natural asset. As you know, if you have an asset and you are keeping it at home, under balata, as we call it, they are useless. But if you use it, whether it is money or it's knowledge or information, then you can benefit from it, you can get profits, and then you get whatever you want to do. This is an example of the amount of the ecosystem that provide in terms of services and products free of charge, $143 trillion every year. God provide us with all of this. It's much, much more than the whole world global GDP or global economy. So we are giving a lot, but we are not using it properly. The other important thing that we deal with biodiversity is mainstreaming. How can you set together, especially different industries like mining, for example, or health or infrastructures, whatever. Some of them depend on ecosystem directly, others indirectly. But the whole idea about mainstreaming or damming in our biology is to avoid and reduce or mitigate any impact that may have on the biodiversity except. So there are many, many sectors. The conventions, especially couple of the conference 13 in Mexico, we agreed on 4 major ones: fisheries, agriculture, forestry, and tourism. Whereas in COP 14 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we extended to another 4, dealing with the infrastructure, health, processing industries, and so on. Invasive species, it became very clear in 1996 when people have to report. As I said, all countries already agreed or signed or ratified the convention in 1992, so they have to provide reports. So when we look at the national reports, it turned up for the first time that invasive species is a problem itself. Now, the problem was people don't know much about it. Even definitions of invasive species. Some people call it invasive, some people call them alien species, some have put them on, I am one of them, beneficiary species. There are very, very confusion. It deal with many, many definitions. So a lot of efforts were made, whether it's in the convention itself, like CBD, or other conventions like Ramsar conventions, CMS, whatever. At the same time, we have to prepare a program. So we agreed in 2010 that invasive species should take a considerable amount of work, and it has very specific target to a great extent that has mainly very clear definitions and priority species, because you cannot deal with hundreds of species. You can have priority species, and sometimes you can go and implement them or manage them through controlling them or eradicate them if you can, which is very, very difficult to a great extent. Post 2020, that means that we are about to deal with finish global biodiversity framework. We call them post 2020. Target 6, they deal with the pathways for introduction, preventing and reducing the rate of introduction and establishment by at least 50%. So we have measures here. We have quantitative target that you can deal with such invasive species. Again, I can speak about invasive species for hours because I have co-chaired many, many meetings dealing with all of these issues itself. Biodiversity cannot work in isolation. It has to deal with all emerging issues. And all of us, we know that the whole world met together in 2015. They agreed on sustainable development goals. And I presume that all of us, we know that we have 17 goals that deal with many, many of them. But if you look at the biodiversity, you'll be surprised to a great extent. It target goal number 14 that deal with the oceans or the marine, 15 that deal with terrestrial, but at the same time, many, many other goals like sustainable production and consumption, like the hunger and clean water, and even cities. Now we talk about sustainable cities to a great extent. What does it mean? It means biodiversity and ecosystem, they contribute significantly in the implementation of more than half of the strategic sustainable development goals to a great extent. The other important issue that we deal is the biodiversity, and it's related to the climate change itself. All the information that tell us now that the climate change now was one of the principal threat to biological diversity in the planet and is projected to become an increasingly important in the future. Issues that deal with the impact, whether it's migrating animals like sharks, like birds, like gazelle, whatever, they can change their breeding shift, extend their breeding range as well, wintering ranges, change the rainfall. All of us, we know that. Population impact, people have to move from one another. We have to deal with future impact, especially at the species level, and many, many of the issues. That means it is a serious problem. There is a link between climate change and biodiversity. If you don't deal with them together, it will be a problem. And I'm very glad that the President of France last week on the COP 14.1, or part one, said the climate fund, they will make 13% of the, or 30% of the climate fund that will go to biodiversity issue. This is very, very, very good. You have to keep in mind as well, what are we talking about? If the climate change is slow, this is going to what we deal with. Loss biodiversity will continue and many of other issues. But if it is extreme, whether like what we suffer nowadays, whether it's dust or it is rain or whatever, this is a situation, this is the kind of impact that we could think about in terms of what's likely to happen to great extent. In the Red Sea and many other places where they have corals, coral reefs, we have witnessed coral bleaching. Coral bleaching, again, in a very simplified way. You have algae that live inside the individual corals. But if you have changed temperature, those ancilli will leave, and then it end up by killing, or all of corals will die. And this is a major problem in Australia and Caribbean, whatever. I'm very glad that in the Egyptian Red Sea, this phenomena doesn't occur, which means that the coral reefs of the Northern Red Sea have a global importance in a way that we can protect them properly, and then we can transfer them to other places that have deteriorated in many other places as well. We have what you call IPCC. The fifth IPCC made it very clear that is who is mostly causing all of this problem and climate change. From my point of view, climate change is a natural phenomenon that's happening since the creation of the world, of the planet Earth. The difference between now and in the past, two things. Number one, the rate of change was very low and human did not exist. Nowadays, the rate of change is very high and the impact of human now. So this is, we have evidence for the climate 50,000 years ago. even 100,000 years ago, and so on. So the human influence is the main driving force that deal with this itself. How can we do? What can we do? How can we deal with the two issues together? I'm giving you examples of 10, shall we say, clues, like the maintaining and restoring native ecosystem. That means that area that's still pristine, we have to protect them. Enhance ecosystem service through what you call it ecosystem rehabilitation and sustainable restoration. May I ask anyone is listening now, they can be unmute, please, to allow other people to listen. Managing habitats for endangered species, creating refuges and buffer zones, and these are examples what's needed to be done. One of the most important things that we are dealing with now about the ecosystem itself is what we call ecosystem-based adaptation. As you know, climate change, they talk about adaptation and mitigation. What does it mean? It means it is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem service as part of overall adaptation strategy to help people to adapt to the adverse effect of climate change itself. Its main aim is to maintain and increase resilience to reduce vulnerability to ecosystem. This is a proper definition of the ecosystem-based adaptation, like the nature-based solution as well. You look at it holistically. How can we work together, climate change and biodiversity together in a way that biodiversity can influence climate change and vice versa? If you remove forests, for example, more carbon dioxide will be there. That means that will be a disaster. And the same thing. If you go to mangroves in the Red Sea, for example, we have mangroves. This is trees that grow at the edge of the shore, and they have incredible power of what you call carbon sequestration, that they can capture oxygen 5 times than even rainforest as well. So we have to look at all of this ecosystem and see how can we protect them and maintain them in a way that they can be more resilient to the ecosystem, to the climate change to a great extent. So it is not only the only one, but it turned out that they are cost effectiveness with very little amount of formation and little amount of resources that you can have higher return investment. I mean, let me explain that in another word. We talk about green economy. What does it mean a green economy? It doesn't have to be green. The green economy came because with inputs of a little bit of seeds, water, soil, sunlight, you can end up with tons of harvest. And that's why you have input and output. There is no ecosystem in the world that it can match a tree itself. I mean, the place where you are now, you have air condition, for example. Input in terms of the electricity is huge compared to what you get out of it. This is what we mean by talking about. This is an example. What can you do in terms of adaptation strategy? If you apply the ecosystem-based options, then like mangroves, for example, or infrastructures, especially urbanizations, whatever, this is an example of how can ecosystem-based adaptation be used in terms of the context itself, overall adaptation. This is another way of look at it in terms of resilience as well. What kind of benefit that you can get out if you implement ecosystem. If you look at it differently as well, you still have another way. You have in a city like Bonn, like Berlin, you have a river, you have green, you have sea, you have whatever. This is the way how can we implement ecosystems through well-defined programs, projects, and specific activities to a great extent. The other important issue that we deal in CBD is the health, human health. People talk about human health in terms of disease. This is not true. Ministry of Construction, for example, the SCAN, they have an important role like providing water supply and sanitation. If you have clean water, not polluted one, you end up by people who are not ill or sick, and they will be more productive, whatever. agricultural production. We need safe food, for example, food and nutrition, human settlements, especially new cities as well, ecosystem management, mental health, traditional medicine, especially in traditional places or far remote places as well. And these are the links between biodiversity and human health. So we agree in principle now, the best way, especially when it comes to COVID-19, we agree in what we call one health approach. It is a balance. You give consideration to the biodiversity and ecosystem dynamic and management. That means a balance between animals, plants, and environment to a great extent. If you consider what happened since we had COP14, Julian already mentioned something about UN Biodiversity Summit, COP15 Part 1, but one of the most important publication that came in only 3 years ago, Global Assessment of Biodiversity. We worked for almost 6 years to assess biodiversity everywhere, in all different countries and all different regions as well. COVID-19, as you know, it is a major problem, but it is biodiversity issues. Global Biodiversity Outlook. This comes every 5 years. They sit together, experts, and assess what have been done, and then they compare it with what we have agreed upon. The other thing which we are almost about to deal with now and finish it is post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In January, we'll meet in Geneva. We may be able to meet with Julian at the time to finish what we have not yet been able to do through online meetings. We needed physical meetings, so the work is almost done. Mainstreaming of biodiversity. As you know, last year, United Nations already have Biodiversity Summit. We have decades for rehabilitation, administration, and whatever. For example, if you take what are the main key messages that came out of global biodiversity assessment. Nature is, and its vital contribution to people are deteriorating worldwide. Nature provides us food, provides us with medicine, and we are deteriorating this and we are damaging them. And the main drivers I mentioned to them, of biodiversity loss are the fragmentation, overuse, climate change, invasive species, whatever. Number 3, all goals, all what we have done in terms of conservation are not yet implemented as we have planned to do, including even the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In spite of all of this, nature can be conserved, restored, and used sustainably while stimulating meeting other global societal goals through urgent and concerted effort, whatever. I mean, this slide, I can spend again 2 hours taking everyone, but the key message, biodiversity, which is our life, supporting life, is deteriorating because blah, blah, blah. All what we have done is not enough. However, the door is not yet. Let me say that in Arabic because it's very important. لو حد بيقرأ القرآن مثلا في سورة
If you are reading Quran, Dr. Mustafa is quoting from the Holy Quran.
Yeah, I'm quoting from the Quran. Yeah.
Chapter.
I have to say it in Arabic first. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر.
The corruption emerged on land and on the sea. دكتور مصطفى، حضرتك ممكن تتكلم على القناة التانية وأنا هترجم، بس مش عايزة أوقف حضرتك.
طب خليني بس أتكلم بس الأول.
اتفضل يا فندم.
You have 4 messages here. Number 1, disturbance in land and sea. Number 2, who's responsible for that is a human. Number 3, we are suffering from what we have done, but the door is not closed yet. This is a God creation that in spite of all what we have done, we still can. In other places, it's called لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Don't destroy the ecosystem after the God have already put everything in proper. If you have time, I don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll give you how the biodiversity and ecosystem are suffering. So these are some factors that almost 75% of the environment are severely altered, changed to a great extent. Global land area have changed as well. These are many, you know, I mean, if I read them, it will take much time, and I know the time is running very fast, but these are example of the species population, how they are suffering now in terms of how many species that we get lost, whatever, in terms of specific species like amphibians, for example, like frogs and others. Coral reefs, almost 30% are already dying, and so on. These are examples of that. If you want to go in specific issues like food and agriculture, this is the current situation for the food and agriculture. If you want to know more about oceans and fishing, for example, most of the fish stocks all over the world have already gone to a great extent. No more sustainable fishing stock to a great extent. Species that they are threatened, certain species by extinction as well. So these are mining and energy. These are the issues that already discussed in the assessment itself, and we came up with volumes of books, whether one for specific for Africa, one for Europe, one for the Caribbean, and so on. Health, what happened in human health to a great extent, climate change. Now we know what this means. 1 degree can make to the species distributions, and so on. These are just examples. So it depends on us what we want. If you look at this curve, this is where we were in 2010. With business as usual, you will end up by doing this. Most of the biodiversity and ecosystem will be lost. If you go just by a little bit of work, this is the way how can you end up. But if you make exerted effort, this is the way how can you end up by restoring the habitats, restoring the ecosystem, and you live in harmony with nature as it's supposed to be. And that's why the world, when they met, we couldn't agree, or at least we agreed that all the targets that we have agreed upon in between 2011 and 2010, all of them were not actually achieved properly. Some progress have been done. So we have to reframe or revise the existing strategy and see where we will be by 2030, and you have to do it properly. So you have a vision of the strategy that you live in harmony with nature, and we hope by 2050 biodiversity will be valued, conserved, restored, and wisely used, and maintain ecosystem to be. So we done it through goals and that we agreed upon. We have 21 targets now that need to be approved in January in Geneva. They deal with the reducing threats to biodiversity. You have to deal with the needs for people itself to live in sustainable way and benefit sharing as well, and so on. So we have 21. The most important thing that post 2020 is dealing with what we call transformative change. Many people keep talking about transformative changes, innovations, and things like that. I look at it in a very simple way. 5 major transformative changes are needed. Don't leave anyone behind. That means that you cannot work alone. You have to work with everybody. You must have an umbrella. That's the best priority umbrella is sustainable development. You have to ensure that economy now is for job creation, not economy for optimizations. Work on peace and institutional accountability. You have to be very professional. But at the same time, you see global, regional, and national partnerships as well. These are the major transformative changes that if you can talk about. I may end up by having a little bit of recommendations here We need to know more about ecosystem service. So information is a must. Information is not enough. You have to monitor it and evaluate it and implement national biodiversity strategy and action plan as well. You have to engage all different stakeholders, including you journalists. We need to consider institutional reform. That means people do a good job in a short time. Issues related to biodiversity. Business plan, this is what we have failed. We couldn't convince banks, for example, to fund projects, and we know investment is very valuable to a great extent. Protected areas. Scientists need to change their mind. Instead of working on what we call pet project, they have to deal with issues related to biodiversity that I mentioned, some of them like invasive species, habitats, economics of species, and whatever, etc. So these are the major things that need to be done within the next couple of years. And we hope by January, we'll finish our job. When we go by April, May to China coming, we'll be able to approve both 2020 that will be available very, very soon. I think I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fouda, for this interesting for this interesting presentation. Thank you so much. I have to pay your attention that some of these aspects of biodiversity will be discussed this afternoon. And the 2 days after this afternoon, we have the states of biodiversity, regional in Africa and regional. And we have also tomorrow and the day after social approach to biodiversity in the morning, and nature hazard and human security afternoon, and then last day green economy and innovation. Thank you so much, Dr. Fouda. Before I open the discussion and questions to you, I just want to make sure that every one of the participants, please make sure that you have the microphone mute when you are not talking, just to give the chance to the voice to be clear. And let me ask you a question, Dr. Fouda, please. Just have a wonderful presentation of the biodiversity in general and the case of Egypt. I need to know, how do you convince, or scientists can convince decision makers that it is highly important to take care of biodiversity, and biodiversity is economy, is something that gives money to the state, especially that you have mentioned that recently you couldn't convince banks to enter or to interfere in some biodiversity projects.
Well, the answer is very simple. I am originally professor at the university, and I have thought that most of professors are good khoga. Khoga. Do you know what this means, khoga?
Yes, foreigners like foreigner.
No. Khoga means a good teacher. Anyway, I thought I am a good teacher, and I couldn't convince my minister. After many, many years, it turned out that whenever I say we have 100 threatened species, for example, or we have 20,000 species of plants, it doesn't mean anything, because he's an engineer. He look at things differently as well. So after a long debate, and because every week he used to send me the role of the cabinet itself, the issues that will be discussed, I laughed. I said, we have a problem here. The problem is communication language. I'm not talking about Arabic or English. How do you communicate with decision makers? And for example, you tell them, if they discuss investments, for example, you tell them biodiversity could be a good investment place because we can ensure the return by at least 300 times as well. Sorry, not 300, 3 folds to a great extent. You can say biodiversity can provide service as well in terms of education. So through curriculum, whatever, the same thing for health, the same thing for gender issues, whatever, because at any cabinet in the world, whenever they meet, they have at least, shall we say, a minimum of 10 issues that they discuss all the time: education, health, job creations, investment, whatever, etc. So you need to change the communication, so the language that you communicate with decision makers. But when it comes to bank, they need business. That means that you have to provide what you call business plan. Business plan, that means that in a very simple way, if you invest $5 here, what will be the return? And you have to provide evidence, whatever. This is what we have been. People who are working on biodiversity conservation were not good because we are not economists. We are biologists, you know, things like that. Anyway, I hope it's clear now. We need communication language that can be
It's a
understood.
difficult mission. It's a difficult mission,
know.
doctor. Difficult
Well-
mission to convince decision makers.
You as journalists can take away and can think about what is the best way of doing it. You know,
Yes,
you need to
yes.
communicate with them in a language that they can be understood and be convinced as well. I told my minister, every time you go to a cabinet, raise your hand. Any issues they discuss, raise your hand, whether you understand it or not. Because as I said, whenever they meet, they discuss job creation, they discuss education, they discuss health, they discuss investment, whatever, and biodiversity can contribute in all of this. And actually it worked very well. But by the time he understood it, he was replaced by another.
Thank you, doctor. Now we open the discussion and questions, please. So we can take 2 or 3 questions at once, and then Dr. Fuda will answer. So who wants to
اوكي انا عندي سؤال لدكتور فوده.
تفضلي.
ask questions?
I have a question for Dr. Fuda.
Kadir.
اوكي I will start. مساء الخير يا دكتور، رئيس المدير. انا بس بتكلم عن
دكتور فودا.
سوري في صوت. اوكي في جزء مهم جدا خاص بربط اتفاقية او بربط
The sound
مصر
needs
وتغير
to be
المناخ.
muted. I'm afraid the sound needs to be
No,
muted.
I'm not muted, but
No,
there's
not you.
a noise somewhere.
Not the speaker. I mean other
Yeah.
sounds, because I cannot.
Actually, there
Thank
is
you.
a big problem in
And
yes. Do you hear me now?
yes,
My voice
yes.
is clear. Okay. سؤالي لحضرتك ازاي
My
نقدر
question
نسلط
to
الضوء
you
على
is
العلاقة
how
القوية
can
ما
we
بين
highlight
التنوع
the
البيولوجي
strong
وتغير
relation
المناخ؟
between
احنا عندنا
biodiversity
كاب
and
26
climate change.
السنة دي
We have the
وكاب 27 السنة الجاية
COP26
هيبقى
this
في
year and
مصر
COP27 the
تركيز
coming
شديد
year is going
جدا
to be
على
held
قضايا
in
تغير
Egypt,
المناخ
and
وربطها
there is
بأعمالنا الصحفية بالحياة اليومية للناس.
issue and its relation
فبالتالي
to the
عدد
livelihood
الناس
of
اللي
people.
بيقدروا يعرفوا
So
تأثير
the
تغير
number
المناخ
of
على
people
حياتهم
who can
اليومية
get
واختياراتهم
the
بيزيد
impact
بشكل
of
كبير.
the
فازاي نقدر
climate change on their
نربط
lives
قضية
is
التنوع
on
البيولوجي
increase.
بتغير
So how
المناخ
can we link
بحيث
the
تزيد الوعي
biodiversity with the climate change so awareness shall be raised?
Well, if you look at my presentation, I have given you few slides about the links between both of them, and at the same time, the impact of climate change on biodiversity. How can we work together? We are getting closer to each other. As I mentioned, the president of France already said 30% of the CMF, the Green Climate Fund will be spent on biodiversity. One aspect of it is we call it nature-based solution. If we, for example, in Egypt, we go to mangroves along the Red Sea, for example, and implement more and more, that they will capture more carbon, and then we will be able to make use of this as in the market itself, we call it carbon market. At the same time, if you go to lakes or the shallow water and the marine ecosystem, we have found that seagrasses, reeds, whatever, they do more or less the same. They can capture a lot of carbon, and we have given them even values, and it turned out the values are much more than the fish that they caught or they catch from the sea or from the land. So you have to agree in principle that we have to work together, and you have to apply the issues of mainstreaming, that when we sit together, we talk to each other, and then we can find what is a common language between all of us, and then we agree on principle on what we are going to do, whatever. Because long time ago, every convention used to work in its own. So this we call it geographical isolation. But now we work together. I mean, in 2 weeks from now, not only 2 weeks, next week, 26, COP26 in Glasgow will start. And if you look at the issues that they are going to discuss, you'll be surprised the link between biodiversity and climate change. All right. حد بس واحد اللي يتكلم، لان وانت بتتكلمي كان في ترجمه وما قدرتش افهم حاجه.
دكتور مصطفى، من فضل حضرتك تقدر تقفل قناه الترجمه عندك، خلي حضرتك على الفلور من الكره الارضيه اللي تحت، حضرتك اختار الفلور ودوس اوكي، فكده مش هتسمع.
What did he say? Okay.
Do you have another question, Hadid?
No, thank you. No, I don't have. Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, for this information.
Okay. Okay, if you have another, yes, Muhammad Ashraf, go ahead, please.
تمام. دكتور
محمد
أيوة
أشرف،
دكتور أنا
yes.
كان عندي سؤال كنت عايز
دكتور مصطفى, I have a question on the best fields that
أضرار بطول بعض
the best aspects of biodiversity that are in place here in Egypt, speaking of the marine life, speaking of the plants, the biodiversity of the animal. So what is the most affected aspects of biodiversity here in Egypt? Thank you.
الإجابة ما هيش أكثر، لأن أكثر دي معناها إن في واحدة أهم من الثانية. أنا شايف إن الجميع
Not to say most. Most means that something is more important than others. I believe that all the ecosystems in Egypt, let it be desert, marine, coastal, agricultural, all are impacted in a way or another. They have got enough deterioration. Unfortunately, whenever the man exists, damage takes place. The climate change, the agricultural, the deterioration is great. So we cannot name an ecosystem as main. The marine life in desert, the overfishing, the agricultural. Name it. You name it. And
في حالة لا بأس بها هي المحميات الطبيعية.
The protected areas are in good shape actually, because we do prevent any activities in the protected areas. The law is well enforced.
بنشجع البحوث العلمية داخل.
We do encourage the scientific research in the protected areas and so on and so forth. So until now, protected areas are least impacted. Least impacted, if I may.
شكرا. إيهاب. تفضل يا إيهاب.
ازيك يا دكتور؟ صباح الفل.
إيهاب, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Doctor, for the presentation. I have two questions. The first question: what is the most important projects conducted by Egypt to preserve the biodiversity? Successful ones, of course. I believe that the best project we have conducted is the establishment of the protected areas. Not only establish them, because establishment is very easy. issuance of laws is very easy. The law 102, I will detail in my coming presentation, but how to manage them. I have chaired the nature conservation sector in the Ministry of Environment for 10 years, and I have my contributions. We have a network of protected areas representing all the ecosystems. We have a clear vision on what we need to do in the coming 20 years. These are among the most important projects. What we have now is the therapeutic and medicinal plants, especially in South Sinai. Now we have medicinal plants for the development of the community.
ويصدرها
So
كمان
the communities can profit from the medicinal plants. This is a very important project as well. Now we have ecotourism as well. Ecotourism in the protected areas. Unfortunately, I'm not following what is happening because tourism is still on hold.
تمام هو عدد المحيط الطبيعي في مصر كام
Okay,
يا دكتور؟
thank you.
How many protected areas? 30,
المحاضرة الجاية إن شاء الله
15%. Next lecture, we are going
انا
to
اسف لو
talk about them.
عطلت
A second question.
انا عايز اعرف طيب انت حضرتك ذكرتها بشكل منتظم بس انا عايزها
mention
يعني حتى لو سريعا ازاي التنوع البيولوجي
this,
بيأثر على
but
الاقتصاد وعلى
briefly,
حياتنا كبشر
how
المثل
biodiversity
او
affects our
الصورة
life
الداخلية بتكون ازاي ابرز
and
الاضرار
our
بتكون ازاي
economy. The negative impacts, I mean.
يا جماعة اللي بيسمع الصوت ده يعمل بس اللي هو انميوت يا جماعة عشان بس اقدر اتكلم يعني. بص انا زي ما قلت لك ان احنا حاولنا
Please mute.
نطلع.
Could you please mute your microphone, please?
ماشي. انا زي ما قلت ان احنا حاولنا نطلع القيمة بتاع النظم البيئية
As
والتنوع
I
البيولوجي
said, that
واخر رقم هو 143 تريليون دولار.
we have 143 trillion dollars value of services and commodities for free, and we do deteriorate them.
بيأثر على الملقحات
Pollution
الفراشات
affect
والنحل
the
والى اخره.
butterflies and bees, and 40% of the global economy is affected because
مش هيبقى فيه زراعة.
agriculture without
مش هناكل مثلا يعني.
butterflies and bees
كتيرة جدا
will
جدا.
be affected, of course, and this
احنا بنغير من مفاهيمنا بدل ما يكون عندنا رصد الحل
goes for all
يبقى عندنا فرق بحث.
areas. So we need to have research teams to cover the different aspects, the social aspect, the economical aspect, not to be pure science. Then, when I was a head of sector of the protected areas, we had that's providing services for the community. So for the tourism, for the camels, for the animals, we have doctors, physical doctors.
وعندي ناس خارجين علوم
And
وعندي ناس
we have graduates of science and agriculture. So it was a spectrum of all specializations. This is why we are speaking with mainstreaming. We are on the same group.
والنظم البيئية
So
والموضوعات البيئية
ecosystems and biodiversity is not limited to a certain ministry. It is the responsibility of everybody, all the ministries. It is cross-cutting. Everybody is suffering, especially in the West, as I said.
الفيروس اللي هو كوفيد 19 ده.
The COVID pandemic changed the whole world economy. $8.3 US affected in 1 year. This is a catastrophe because the economic growth, we are speaking about 1 to 2%. So once we are dropping this way, so what can we do? Part of our nature, so we have to apply the new concept, which is new One Health approach, a balance to be made by the health of the plant, animal, environment, and man.
شكرا يا دكتور.
Dr. Fuda, please, we have a question from Dina Maraghi. Yes, Dina.
أهلا دينا.
شكرا اولا على البرزنتيشن تعالي دايما
Thank
بنستفيد
you for the presentation. We always learn from you.
اتكلمت فيه
For the protected areas, you said that there are certain species that are endangered, yet we can care for them so we can enjoy them for the maximum time. How can we do that? You said also that the climate change was weak and slow in pace, and demand did not exist, unlike now. While the stonified desert, I'm not sure if the term is correct, I'm sorry, the stonified desert is still here. Can you please elaborate on this? And when we select a protected area, it must be selected based on its international importance. So what do you mean by the international importance? Well, let's speak about the endangered species. The stonified desert
كان في كمية
wasn't
أمطار
like that. Actually, there was heavy rainfall and it has been moved from a place to another place. This is not the habitat of this desert. 30 million years ago, the life was totally different. Also, we have to accept that.
بقاء الأصلح والى آخره. يعني كان في وقت كان العالم كله dominated
The
بالديناصورات.
whole world used to be dominated by dinosaurs, right? But when the weather changed, the dinosaurs is cold-blooded animal, so they couldn't tolerate the cold weather. They couldn't resist. While rats,
هوموثيرميك اللي هو درجة الحرارة
which
بتاعته
is homothermic, could survive.
ازاي بقى نعمل الكلام ده؟ بنعملها عن
So
طريق كذا حاجتين. واحد
how can we do that?
بنعمل ما يسمى in situ
So
conservation.
in the protected areas, we have in situ conservation. Every year we care and we have captive breeding program for the animals every year, animals and birds. So you can restore the animals and give them the due attention. When they are in certain amounts, we can release them to nature. So I made an agreement with the private sector. We started with the 3 deers, and in 3 years we have more than 100 deers. So we started to release them, let them free in nature. So we have 2 types of conservation. We have inside its environment. Excited means
هتكلم الحاجات دي برضو
setting
بالتفصيل.
them free. And this is going to be elaborated. I forgot the other part of your question.
الطبيعية أهمية دولية، يعني إزاي بيتم
International importance. What do you mean by international importance? You go to Wadi Rayyan protected area. We have Wadi al-Hitan or Wales Valley. The Wales Valley is a World Heritage area, which means that it is unique, globally unique.
في أظن أيامها كنا
When we launched this file in Durban, South Africa in 2005, it was extremely important that you have to highlight the global significance. So we told them that this links sea and inland, which means that the fossil, the very first animal follis, which is Pacific tourist district, that was king lizard. King lizard
سحلية كبيرة قوي كان طولها
is a
19
very big lizard.
فشيء طبيعي
Weighs 7 tons and it's 7 meters in length.
حاجة حصلت اونلاين يا اما الحاجات دي
Something
تختفي
happened inland. Either they are going to disappear or to survive and continue. They survived by playing in water. By time, the limbs started to grow fins. The very first marine mammals in the world
هنا دلوقتي اقدر اقول وادي الحيتان
grew in Wales Valley.
الأهمية العالمية
This is why they have global significance. All the protected areas are important, and there is an international convention called
دي تبع اليونسكو ما هيش السي بي دي
the UNESCO
بتتعامل مع التراث العالمي سواء اذا كان تراث طبيعي وتراث
either natural or
المنطقه الثانيه كانت جلوبال سيجنيفيكانس اللي هي منطقه سانت كاترين لان
And
سانت كاترين
Saint Catherine also is another important protected area.
the oldest monastery in the world 1800 سنه، اكتر من 1800 سنه
It is
وستيل
the oldest throughout the world, more than 800 years, and it is still functioning.
وناهيكي بقى عن الكالتشرال هيريتج اللي هي
Let
نمت
alone the cultural heritage.
عندنا في مصر المنطقتين دول. في حاجه تانية تبع الاي سي ان بنسميها جرين
There is
ليست اوف بروتكتد ارياز.
something else.
كويس، بنديها زي
We
اوورد.
have protected areas that are working and they are being awarded. We selected Ras Mohammed, we selected the Wales Valley or Wadi al-Hitan, and we selected the Camels Valley or Wadi al-Jamal. We awarded them. This is about the international significance.
Dr. Fuda, please, we have a question from Julian about the target of the convention. How Egypt can manage to have the target of the convention on biodiversity concerning the protected areas. Egypt has new protected areas according to this convention.
انا مش سامع حاجه خالص يا رشا، يعني واضح قوي ان في نويز في الصوت. اسالي السؤال فيري كلير. بتقولي ايه؟
يا دكتور.
في نويز.
How Egypt can manage to get the كده سامعني يا دكتور؟
ايه سامع كده. how Egypt can manage ايه؟
سامعني يا دكتور؟
ايوه سامعك.
To get the target of the convention on biodiversity concerning the protected areas.
والله if you wait for 5
minutes. New
minutes.
protected areas in Egypt now.
I know.
Because you said we have 15.
we have 30 protected areas that represent 15% of the whole Egyptian territory. Tell him after 5 minutes when I make presentation about the case study in Egypt, I will talk about this in depth again. Very clear. He has to wait. Nashi?
Okay, and I think we have another question. معتصم.
أيوة معتصم.
أهلا وسهلا يا دكتور. شكرا.
Please ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me؟
أيوة طبعا.
هو بس حضرتك اتكلمت في المحاضرة عن فكرة
You said in your presentation you addressed the biodiversity as economy. You also addressed the approach through which we can communicate with the policymaker, which is going to make the difference by the end of the day. As a journalist, when I think about it, when I look at the campaigns targeting the public for the biodiversity, it always relies on the emotional photos, a turtle or something like that. However, communicating with the policymakers is a bit tricky. What I mean is that look at the climate crisis. The main problem is that the global economy is based on the growth. So how to convince, how to communicate that an area, instead of building an industry that will generate profit and growth, we can keep it.
Very clear. سؤال دائما احنا بنواجهه وهو
always you say that what is the conflict between development and environment conservation.
ان احنا لما بنقول للناس دول لا او اعمل والى اخره احنا بنعملها.
It is thought that we do that through guidelines. You are starting a project, welcome, but we have what we call the brown pollution or brown economy.
احنا دلوقتي بنعاني منه. يعني انا مثلا قبل ما انت تتولد في الخمسينات جم ضحكوا علينا وقالوا لنا ده احنا عندنا ماده دي هتضيع
So they said that we have a pesticide that will eliminate the cotton worm because cotton was so very important in the 50s, and we used the DDT, and we're still using
نعاني
it till
منها
now in the
لكن ضد
soil. We are suffering from it, and we still have the cotton worm. So it is a joke now. So at least to have environmental impact assessment, but there should be, yes, we conduct this environmental impact assessment, but it needs four things. First, to describe the environment, the project description, what are the implementation measures, and likely banks. So what are the mitigation procedures that you are going to take, especially if there is pollution or impact on human health? We are not against development. On the contrary, we are encouraging development. That's why we say the green economy, the blue economy, the revolving economy, or the circular economy. So I'm not saying here that the biodiversity should be perceived as from a 100% economic perspective. No, we say that review it as that God created this universe with a certain balance. If there is any intervention, this will create imbalance. I gave you an example as the DDT, the cotton worm in the 80s. They said that in 80s, they said there is the poultry, for the poultry, Egypt was producing 2.5 chicken every day. Because they were taking hormones, and within 30 days the chick turns to 1 kilogram, while my late mother, she was raising the chick for 6 months. But now the hormones is doing another thing. I can also talk about the chemicals, hormones, the genes now, and the gene mutation. COVID-19 is a kind of genetic modified organism that had been introduced, as we all now know. And they said that there is a conspiracy theory to get rid of Africa. So we all say that we need to live in harmony in one environment. So God gave us a lot, but don't take everything. And we have many problems, endless problems, or endless proverb says that I will live today, I will die tomorrow, and this pennies will be saved for rainy days. So no, we have a lot of proverbs. So why God created all these things for certain purposes, and they should maintain certain balance. We cannot get the sun from the west. If this happens, this will be a total chaos. The same for the moon, the same for any living organism. So when they used the DDT, the Egyptian in agricultural environment, what did we have? The cotton worm. What else? The owl. We had the owl in our environment, the fox. All these creatures were eating rats, and when they don't have them anymore, we started to have rats everywhere, and we started a national campaign to get rid of rats. During the Nasser's era, there was a great revolution, and we started a lot of factories, and unemployment was down. But they didn't have enough experience to do environmental impact. So Helwan, it was a healing spot for tourists. So the springs that we have in Helwan, so now it is fossilized because of the cement coming from the chimneys. We have to learn from our mistakes. I agree. Do we learn?
الايكونوميك جروث الارج بتاع
So yes, there is an urge for economic growth. And personally, I don't know, are you optimistic that things are changing? No. So one of the reasons to convince the decision maker and say, for instance, if they are killing a gazelle, what the economic value of this gazelle equals that. But of course, we cannot make everything green, but the value of anything
الاعتبار
should be taken into consideration, and there are many standards that comprise this. So if you have a girl smiling or a baby smiling or a baby crying, so how does all these things work? I'm talking here about
انت
the
لو خدت الجانب
aesthetic perspective. What about the moral perspective, cultural, religious, social, environmental, economic perspectives? All these, that's why we say that we were not successful when we built the business case. The coral reefs, for instance, we know that they protect the coasts. That's why we don't have erosion problem in Red Sea. We have it in the Mediterranean because there are no coral reefs in the Mediterranean. But after some time, we found that the coral reefs are so important for the fish, and it consists 17% of the fisheries of the world. After that, we found that the coral reefs has an importance from touristic perspective. In 2010, we received 10 million tourists in Red Sea for the coral reefs. Now, studies say that the coral reefs release repellents as anti-fungus, anti-carcinogenic, etc. So do you need more? I'm going to give you another example. In the Arab countries, they always say that he's living in a black neighborhood because it has a bad odor. And after that, they found that this is oil, this is petroleum, because our understanding of development is wrong. So wealth is made, and if we have these useful things, yes, it is useful for the human being. And after that, someone finds an economic advantage from some of these inventions. Number three, the application of technology and the application of science for the benefit of humanity. So if I apply those three, I can do it. So when in the past, when you say that they were living in a black neighborhood, no, they are the richest people now in the world. In in the 20s, in 1928, Alexander Fleming, we know that the bread is molded if it is left for a long time. But he noticed that nothing grows around this mold, and that's how he could extract the penicillin to save more than 20 million people, 20 million person in the First World War. So I can give you a lot of examples more than that. شكرا. Thank you, Dr. Fouda.
معتصم.
Thank you, Mu'tasim.
أشكر حضرتك يا دكتور مصطفى
At the
على
outset, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Mustafa. I really personally benefited a lot. There is a certain point that is my voice clear?
بسرعة يا صلاح
تمام.
من فضلك لو
فكرة
سمحت.
Please,
نقل
Salah, please. Yes, to move the coral reefs from the Red Sea to protect them. So transferring the coral reefs, do we need special steps for doing that so that we can transfer the coral reefs? And what's the importance of such issue? Is it important for the protection of coral reefs, or can we move the coral reefs from the Red Sea? No. I want you to understand me correctly. First, the coral reefs should stay as it is in its place. If there is a vessel that breaks coral reefs, in this case, we put it in another place using advanced technology. What I'm saying that
شمال البحر الأحمر
coral reefs in the north of the Red Sea
هو عبارة عن
is what we call evolutionary laboratory, that it endures the temperature. Let's see the water temperature in the past 40 years, and we found that the coral reefs didn't suffer from bleaching. That's why we started to pay more attention. How? By protecting it more, so no more destruction, and the tourists are not allowed to take pieces of the coral reefs. This is the first thing, protection. Second, through the experiments that we started to do, especially the deteriorated places, so we started to move them to another place. That's how we can solve some of our economic problems, because all the world say that they have coral reefs. Why? If you in 2100, if we are still living, they are going to say once upon a time we had coral reefs here in the Americas or in Australia or in Africa, or they had a lion. So we are going to say, no, we have coral reefs. There are four advantages of coral reefs. First, protecting the coast. Second, the fisheries. Third, the tourism. Fourth, the health advantage. And by studying more, you will find more. This is the greatness of biodiversity. When we understand more, we understand better, we can enjoy what God created for us. So whenever you conduct a study, you should know why this is created for. Uh, mm, uh, One of the professors said that I have been working for 20 years and I didn't know the benefits or the advantages of parasites. I told him, let's imagine that there are no parasites or biodiversity. For sure. Mm. So everything has a purpose.
About a song called Azima Masr. Egypt is great.
So Egypt is great. What does this mean?
Including Egypt, I could say very clear, Egypt has witnessed the major events that took place on planet Earth. Yani, you can speak about Egypt more than almost 1,000,000,000 years in St. Catherine, for example, and you could see all of these mountains and the basalt and whatever. That was a long time before even creation of life on Earth. You can talk about Egypt in a place called the Babea, south of Egypt, very close to Luxor, where you have these sections that represent what you call marine life. That means the Mediterranean Sea covered most of Egypt long time ago, almost 50, 60 million years ago. And what kind of life that exists in the Egypt was completely covered by the sea. Or 35, 40 million years ago, we talked about the whales, the Valley of Wales, and I'm very glad to say I'm the one who submitted this file to the UN UNESCO, and it was accepted, and then we manage it properly. When you have the first marine mammals in the world in Egypt that represents the life link between life on land and the sea as well. You can talk about Egypt almost long time before even ancient civilizations. This kind of Egypt and all of these red dots represent the settlement of human beings. So we know what happened in Egypt 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, even 200,000 years ago. The first human settler in Egypt, Africa, are the people who live in Fayoum, where we have what we call undocumented civilizations. We have a lot of other civilizations in Egypt, in the Western Desert, when the climate was typical Mediterranean and the amount of rain was as much as 400 mil per year. That means that you ended up by having a vegetation that attracted all animals from Africa or the rest of Africa, whether we used to have lions, we used to have giraffe, we used to have elephants, and all of this. This is Azima Mas, the greatest in Egypt. So Egypt depends on the wealth of its known resources on, we depend on our natural resources for our sustainable life. It's not only the ancient civilizations, that's because you have diverse life, whether it's migratory species or the Arust al-Bahr, dugong, or very endangered species like this. And we have diverse life to a great extent, not only species, but habitat. Habitat could be agricultural, for example, could be marine, could be coastal, and so on. Not only species or habitat, but ancient civilizations, much, much older than Egyptian civilization. Can you believe it? That we used to have cow 20,000 years ago in the western desert of Egypt, and these were brought from Syria and from Africa as well. Or we have very interesting landscape in the white deserts, whatever. So the natural resources in Egypt are so immense, not only in terms of species, habitat, but even the cultural resources itself. This is an example of the wildlife in Egypt. These are birds, diversity. We have more than 480 species of birds. Most of them are migratory species as well. We have very interesting coral reefs, and anyone who went to Al-Ghada or Sharm el-Sheikh, they know what we meant by talking about marine life to a great extent, whether it's crab, whether it's sludge, whatever. Fishes, we have more than 1,500 species of fishes as well. We have endangered species like Arust al-Bahr or this Samadai, the dolphins, turtles, whatever. So we are lucky to have all of this diversity of life, camels, gazelle, reptiles, and all habitats like mangroves, wetlands. And these are examples of the beauty of Egypt itself. Even cultural heritage is not only in the desert, but everywhere. Cultural heritage is not only those people that they are born. No, they have their own cultural heritage that stem from thousands of years, depending on where you are. If you are in the Red Sea, for example, you have tribes like Ababda, like Sharia, like whatever. Whereas Abu Ali, Awlad Ali, في Western Desert of Egypt, and so on. How can we protect this? You must have a frame for biodiversity. This frame has its own strategy. I mentioned in the previous presentation that if you want to have a strategy, you must have a vision, you must have a mission, you must have projects, you have reporting or whatever. So this is our strategy principles. Our main principle is management of natural resources should be based on scientific basis, not only on other things. Any evaluation should be based on scientific. To be able to do that, you need capacity. So you need to train people, for example. At the same time, you must need resources to be able to conserve these resources. Participation of all different actors in the whole way. An instrument and incentive. Without incentives, you'll not be able to be promoted to do more work. National action should be implemented regionally. These are the main principles in Egypt. Priorities for action: institutional reform, protected area establishment, biodiversity inventory, that means that we monitor our resources, public awareness, management of specific habitats, whether it is arid, whether it's wetlands, whatever, ecotourism. These are priorities for action. We have to establish objective for nature conservation in Egypt, all right? And at the same time, without law, you cannot do much work. So I call law is a teeth. We have several laws, whether it's for agriculture or for protected areas or for fisheries or environmental protections and so on. You have to be part of the whole global communities, Convention on Biological Diversity, Ramsar, CITES, CMS. These are different conventions that are part. You have obligation according to an institution in Egypt, دستور يعني, and if you join any convention, it is part of our legislation. That means that we have to implement them. We have to implement projects funded from different sources, whether it is GEF, Global Biodiversity Facility, or from bilateral, that means that like Italians, for example, Americans or whatever, these are some kind of projects that we have already implemented in Egypt. And we were able to prove that Egypt's most important and effective tool to date for Egypt is to conserve its biodiversity and fulfill its international commitments. Protected areas are the most important tool for conservation to a great extent. Now we have a network of 30 protected areas covering 15% of the whole country. Most of the system plans already developed, at least 15 or more ready to be declared. Most habitats, landscapes are represented there. Most of the important archaeological sites already present in Egypt, and at the same time, our traditional culture. This example of the map showing all of the protected areas in Egypt. Example of Ras Mohammed, how the Ras Mohammed is well known for its coral reefs, or St. Catherine, which is a World Heritage for the الأخت اللي هي كانت بتتكلم على international importance, World Heritage Site. Lake Borealis, example of Ramsar Conventions. Siwa protected areas represent very, very interesting habitats, especially sand dunes. Wadi Rayyan, Wadi Gimal. These are examples of protected areas. What are the issues in terms of management? We have to deal with hunting management. It is a serious problem that people catch species like this, sharks, which are endangered, or as little as fanak, for example, or raptors, whatever, etc. So we have to develop management plan for hunting. At the same time, invasive species, the whole world already facing it all over the world now. Coastal development, especially in Gona and other places, look at the natural places. Have a look at this site used to be, and this was that was Hurghada 30 years ago, but now when you look at it, it's different. Look at what tourists do. They sit on corals and damage them, or mooring to a great extent. Look at here. It is a carnival. People use the anchor here and corals and protect them. So we have to look at that issue to a great extent. Habitat degradation. Everywhere you have all of these remains of cars as they stay for years and years, or grazing by animals. Solid waste. فحدث بلا حرج. Egypt, we are facing serious problem in terms of waste. What are the resources that we need to use here? Staff. We have more than 700 staff, well educated and dedicated as well, and they were provided enough training to be able to. I mean, when I left the university and worked at the Director of Nature Conservation, I used to have less than 90%. I left them with 700 people, with many of them have PhD, master, bachelor science, whatever. Resources like infrastructure in terms of training centers, for example, or even some places like Wadi Gimal, for example, here, and even Eco Lodge as well, and so on. So we have infrastructure and protected areas. Without infrastructure, people can damage as much as we can. These are the ranger. We have to provide accommodation. The ranger could be can live in a room like this, or even a hut like this in different places to agree. But all of them, they equipped with computers, whatever. What kind of tools in terms of management? We use zoning, like remote sensing, for example, management plan for each protected area, which are used as, for example, core area allowed for some activities, whether it is whatever. So zoning plans were developed to a great extent. We have to implement the law, not only alone, but together with the police forces to a great extent. And these are EIAs, all of these development along the Egyptian coast. They have to, according to the law, they have to prepare a management plan, not only EIA. Mooring. Mooring is a tool that boats can use anchor, for example, in a way that they can, like this one. So we have I would say the largest mooring system in the world is in the Red Sea to great extent. اللي بنسميها بالعربي الشمندرات. Monitoring and research, for example. This is a kind of research that we have done using camera trap, for example. We were able to see some species that we never seen before. Bird ringing to great extent. We were able to go through the whole process of migratory birds, habitat monitoring, whatever. These are the different tools. Public education. We have to involve many people, whether kids, for example, or people in school, or people at universities, and so on. We have to restore deteriorated habitats, for example, like the crown of thorn, that was a major problem. Mangrove rehabilitation, we planted almost 150 acres of land. Beach clean camp, solid waste removal. We have to use technologies like GIS, satellite images, whatever. And certainly cultural heritage, we have to take care of them. You see, this is a medical doctor goes from one place to another in a full remote area in a way that they provide service to these people. But at the same time, we have to provide service to their animals. And we need to develop their handcrafts in a way that we ended up by having very interesting, or captive. I mentioned something about ex situ conservation or in situ conservation. This is ex situ conservation. In Sharm el-Sheikh, we were successful in doing this. And this is me when I was young, taking care of animals. This hyena, these are turtles, these are. Even we have to take part of some problems like virus, COVID, or the bird flu to a great extent. We established several strategies like the ecotourism in a way that we ended up by having Egypt as a world-class ecotourism destination, but you have to do it through conservation. I mean, this building, for example, when you go to Wadi Hitan, all of these buildings are part of the whole system to a great extent here. We are not having concrete, for example, to disturb the whole landscape to a great extent. All right, so these are part of the whole ecotourism. Ecotourism, in a very simple way, it is responsible tourism. People that they come and they encourage to understand how people sustained life for hundreds and thousands of years, for example. But at the same time, they don't through water, they don't through the wastes, whatever, etc. These are examples of cultural heritage. It is very important in Egypt as well. We have to develop our cultural heritage by documenting them and identify all of the challenges. These are examples. You could see in Egypt here, you could see all of these prehistoric in St. Catherine and many places all over Egypt. So we have a well documentation, not only for people that they are of different types. This is completely different. This is Ababda from Basharia, from Red Sea. This is from the Siwa, and so on. We have learned a lot from these people who were able to develop their handicrafts, for example, develop community to be part of the whole system. We have to protect even their way of life, how they sustain life. We involve them in medicine plants projects, for example. We have to take care of all of these people in a way that we enjoy working with them, because this coffee, it's completely different from our coffee in Cairo. And these are examples of the role of...
Thank you, Dr. Fouda.
right, تقرأ؟ في حاجة؟ Rasha.
We have questions. We have 2 questions. Yes, please. Could you please just conclude the presentation to get chance for 2 questions?
All right. Okay, these are examples of what we are doing. Just I'm giving you an example. What are the lessons that we learned as well? What publications that we made? Success stories. Many important issues in terms of the financing, in terms of the economics, in terms of our future plan. And lastly, our 6th national report. This is the indicator for our success and we're able to develop a program in a way that we ended up having 6 targets out of 20 were on track. More work is needed. National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan need revision, and institutional reform is crucial. I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fuda. Just if you accept, Dr. Fuda, could we put your presentation online for everybody?
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
For all the participants. Okay.
will send
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now we have only 2 questions for Dr. Fuda. Any of you? In order to take break.
أنا ممكن أسأل سؤال.
اتفضل.
I have a question. Yes.
أيوة اتفضل.
صباح الخير يا دكتور الأول.
Good morning, Dr. Mustafa. I have a couple of questions and I will be providing them as brief as I can.
هنخصص جزء يعني جهود مصر أو جهود وزارة البيئة لتعزيز
The
التنوع.
Egyptian efforts and the Ministry of Environment's efforts in enhancing the biodiversity, especially when it comes to overfishing. Are there any lawsuits or fines or offenses for the overfishing? This is the first question. The second question, you have touched upon the pollution very quickly. I don't know the position of Egypt when it comes to pollution, but very recently there is a presidential initiative to transform the vehicles to natural gas rather than diesel. E-cars are already gradually there. Is there a plan, a time frame for the state to reduce the CO2 emissions? For instance, do we have a plan in place or not? The third question.
اتكلمت عن كبريتاج في حلوان وأنا
You
بصفتي
mentioned the capitage in Helwan.
توضح
I
يعني
live in Helwan, so would you please elaborate more on Helwan? Because I just live adjacent to cabritage, so please stress on it. Thank you.
والله الإجابة على الحاجات دي
My
كلها
answer to all of this
هقوله باختصار بسيط
is
جدا.
going to be provided in an hour later.
محميات طبيعية أي حد
As for
يخش
fishing, in a protected area, anybody steps into a protected area and fishes or hunts or catches,
ناجحين فيه قوي.
they will be arrested immediately.
ونعمل حالة
They get arrested.
للمحكمة
A
وبنعمل حاجة
lawsuit is started immediately,
تقدير الدمج
and a damage assessment is being done to the person can pay a fine. This is inside the protected areas. As for outside area, the police takes place. We have the police and environment, especially in wetlands. And honestly speaking, overfishing is still in place in many of places. We need to receive reports from the people by social media, for instance. If you follow what happened in الجمعة market or سوق الجمعة, this is a market for the wildlife. The campaigns have been made and things got under control. Also, when you find a turtle in a restaurant, for instance, this is a crime and they are being taken into their original place. This needs resources which goes beyond the capabilities of the nature conservation sector. I cannot answer the remaining part that is related to the state's efforts. As for cabritage Helwan, Helwan has always been a place for therapeutic tourism due to the nice weather and the cabotage water that used to treat certain diseases for more than 100 years. After the revolution,
زي مصانع
development activities have taken place in Helwan, such as cement plants and steel and iron factories. They have not conducted the environmental impact assessment. There was no environmental law actually back then. The amount of exhausted cement, they have filters now and so on and so forth. This reduces the amount, yet there are exhaust that leads to lung diseases
المعادي.
from Helwan and Maidi.
اسهل حاجه حط عربيتك مثلا كده وسيبها نص ساعه هتلاقي على طول في thin
Put your
layer كده.
car and leave it for half an hour and you will find a thin layer drops on your car. Decreased, of course, but a pity. It's a pity that we have a World Heritage place that we can invest in. This is why we conduct our environmental management. You said that the highest rates of lung disease.
ده حقيقي ده حقيقي.
It's true.
طيب شكرا دكتور فودة. من
Thank you.
فضلكم يا جماعة الأسئلة تبقى قليلة يعني قصيرة.
Please keep your questions minimal so we can finish in time. One more question only because we have to go on a break. Iman? I'm not sure my sound is clear. Yes.
كان عندي سؤال عن الخطوات
Well, I
الواقعية.
have a question on the practical steps made by Ministry of Environment related to Eco-Egypt campaign that promotes the protected areas in Egypt that was launched a while ago, and I need to know what happened in this campaign.
هو اسمه المهندس محمد عليوة.
There is engineer Muhammad Aliwa. He is a project manager. This is a project that was signed by Jeff in 2018 and it achieved half of its objective since we are already midterm of this project. The idea is that you conduct the environmental tourism in the protected areas. We started this in 2000.
مثلا الفندق ما يرميش ميه كتيره ويبقى الصلب بتاع ده
focus on the hotels waste and to have solid waste management.
ده دلوقتي واين هو وايه اللي بيحصل.
About the position of this project for the time being.
والسياح خفهم.
Well, given the pandemic situation and the impact on tourism, I cannot give you
في شرم الشيخ
a bit of information.
وزعوا جوائز والى اخره.
Yesterday, the last year, there were certain awards, and what I believe is that some resources are being saved, so some of the protected areas can receive tourism. Also, new protected areas are being established because our annual plan is to have 40 protected areas representing 20% of the Egyptian territories. Engineer Muhammad Aliwa can answer you better than me because he is following on the project day to day. Thank you.
دكتور فودة احنا عندنا سؤالين.
دكتور فودة.
ممكن ناخد فيهم سؤالين.
10 more minutes. We have 2 more questions from Mohsen and Ahmed.
بسرعة.
you.
سؤالين قصيرين من فضلك.
Short questions, please.
From Tunisia. The first question is about endemism and the responsibility of Egypt in protecting its endemic species. The second question, I would like to hear about the problems in managing protected areas in Egypt and the role of local people and civil society organizations in managing them. Thank you.
أحمد.
طب ناخد السؤال الثاني برضو بالمرة عشان نجاوب عليهم الاثنين مع بعض.
بالمرة يا دكتور. أحمد سبع الليل.
Let's have the other question.
يعني دكتور مصطفى يعني الحديث عن
مصطفى
كده لكن الحقيقه الممارسات بتكون غير جيده. سؤالي بيدور حول
Practice is different from theory. Why, my question, why there is miscommunication between Ministry of Environment and journalists? This is the first question. The second question, why does Ministry of Environment ignores the role of youth when it comes to the environmental challenges in Egypt? Why doesn't them
عن كم هذا الكم الهائل
engage youth? And why Ministry of Environment is turning a blind eye to the tree cutting in Cairo?
الوزارة من سنة 2010 يعني بقالي
Ahmed,
11
I
سنة.
quit my job 11 years ago in the Ministry of Environment, so I am not a decision maker. Accordingly, I cannot,
ولو اتصلت بيا أنا كنت
I'm
باخد
not an
action.
officer. I used to take actions about the miscommunication with the Ministry of Environment. You can ask them. Of course, youth play very important role, and we have plenty of activities for them. Yes, the
ازاي احنا نعمل مبادرة اسمها
tree
اتحضر
cutting and الحضر الأخضر or be ready for the green, and we cut the trees at the same time. This is catastrophe. I agree with you. It's catastrophic. This is strange.
الناس دول لازم
There are some lunatic people who are removing anything that is green in color, and they must be held accountable. They need to be held accountable because law must be enforced to everybody. I don't want to lose my temper, please. As for the malpractices, I have given
أكتر من
some
300 منتج
examples.
وبين فيديوهات
I
وبين
have published plenty of publications, books, booklets, pamphlets, CDs. I was responsible back then, but
ماذا يحدث دلوقتي؟
now
الدور
this is something I cannot speak about. The role of NGOs is endless when it comes to the protected areas. We have the protected areas and we have NGOs, especially in South Country. And they pay special attention to the traditional knowledge, and they took part in the project of medicinal
فإذا
herbs
هنا
and plants. They have a role, but the role is not clear for everybody because not all of them have the capacity on how to maintain this. They think that they will visit the protected area and take part in the activities.
دكتور فودة كان في سؤال في الأول من تونس
Dr.
أستاذ محسن
Fuda, we had a question from Tunisia about management.
طب ما أنا اتكلمت عن الإدارة في مصر من زوايا كتير جدا جدا.
Well, I
نرجع
have addressed this from a number of perspectives. Referring back to the lecture, we have the hunting, we have the invasive species, and we have the protected areas, and we introduced the monitoring. Those are related to issues related to the management. But he mentioned endemic species as well. The endemic species that are unique to Egypt. We have a registry of such endemic species. Unfortunately, they are deteriorating. And the solution, as I mentioned a number of times,
conservation
is through in situ conservation. Inside and outside the habitat.
في عندهم فالكون
Get to Dubai, they have Falcon Hospital with 30 million US dollars expenses every year because they pay special attention to falcons. In Saudi Arabia, they have a very broad program
بتاع ده الغزلان والمامدز
for
الكبيره
gazelles and large mammals.
والنماذج اللي انا
There should be something similar, and we are quite successful in the models that we have adopted in the plants. We have cultivated more than 30 medicinal
اهتمينا ب
plants, and we are providing special attention to turtles and tortoises and the marine life as well. We do have activities, and we used to be very proud of it. It's documented. You get to the website, you will find all of such efforts.